Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, welcome. This is what our tutorial is about today. A cube, a pyramid, a triangle, and a cylinder, creating them in SketchUp. So you need to follow the link that I've generated or that I've linked to in Google Classroom. Um, Log in using your Learn34, and this is kind of what you'll get to when you go create new. By the way, I used feet and inches. It's what I'm used to working in. I can work in millimeters, but for the purpose of this, just use feet and inches. You don't have to worry about feet anyways. So this is the environment you get to when you open up a file in SketchUp. On the left, these are your make and move about tools. And over on the right, these are panels that can kind of augment your model. So these are the basics on the left. The first thing I always do is get rid of the lady. I just select her and hit delete. And there are a bunch of shortcuts. There's a bunch of keyboard shortcuts that will make your work with SketchUp go a little bit faster. So the space bar is the first one. That selects this arrow tool. So making a cube, pyramid, tent shape, and a cylinder down here. And what I'm going to start with is the rectangle tool. So I can press R and hit the rectangle tool or open it up down here. Make yourself familiar with these over time, kind of work through them and honestly play with them, figure out what they do. So I've started drawing a rectangle. I started at the origin, and I'm just going to type in 2, 2. So I haven't clicked the rectangle closed or anything, and don't worry, it is small. That's 2 inches by 2 inches, and the lady was true life size. That's one of the benefits to working in SketchUp is you can make something life size, and I fully recommend that. So I'm just using the center wheel, on the mouse. If I roll it forward, it zooms in, roll it back, it zooms out. If I click it, I open up the orbit tool. You'll notice this tool down here is the orbit tool. So I've just made a square. That's all I've done so far, 2 inches by 2 inches. And I'm going to select it. Now there's multiple ways of selecting things. I'm just going to drag an arrow around it. And what I'm going to do is make 4 of them. If I hit Control, so I hit M, sorry, let's go back. I hit M for move, and you'll notice that I've got this four-way arrow tool up. If I hit Control, there's a little plus sign that appears next to that. It's a little bit hard to see. It's small, but it is a plus sign. It is there. And if I click once and move it to the right, I'm moving it on the red axis. This is typically what we refer to as the x-axis in math. Green is the y-axis, and straight up on the blue axis is usually referred to as the z-axis. So we are working in 3 dimensions here. And I want to stay on the red axis. I'm going to type in 4 and enter. That gives me a space of 2 inches between them. If I then type in 3x without clicking anything else, without hitting anything else, I've made 3 copies. And so that's an easy way of making multiples. In other programs, it's typically referred to as the array tool. But that gives us spacing to do our cube, our pyramid, our tent shape, and our cylinder all in a row. So I'm going to use this tool, the push-pull tool, P for push-pull, and I've dragged that surface straight up. I hit 2, enter, and all I'm doing is clicking with my left mouse button. Okay, nothing fancy. I can move it again, or I hit escape, and that gets me out of doing anything I don't want to do. Now, probably the most important lesson you can get about SketchUp is as soon as you make something useful, if you want a cube, you've made a cube, the first thing you need to do is select the whole thing. And let's talk about selecting things. If I click once, I've selected a surface or a line. If I click twice on that line, I've selected the line and the 2 surfaces next to it. If I click twice on a surface, I select the lines adjacent to it as well as that surface. If I click 3 times, I select everything that it's touching. I can also do that by clicking around. Now the most important thing, right-click, make component. I'm going to call it the cube. You can name it. You don't have to name it. It depends how complicated you think your model's going to get. If you're going to have a bunch of different shapes, it might make sense to label them. If you're going to build something that you're modeling, actually label it what you would label it in your parts list. So there's a cube. We're finished with that part. What that does, and by the way, right-click explode, I've just undone that. And the reason I want to do this is because if I go to move that cube and I select a surface, all kinds of crazy things can happen. So select it, right-click, make a component, call it cube. It says, okay, it worked out. So there's my cube. If I then go to move it, nothing weird will happen. The next shape that I want to make is my pyramid. Sorry, that was Mr. Penner. And I'm just drawing two diagonal lines. So I'm drawing two diagonal lines. You'll notice they went corner to corner. I hit M. And what I'm doing is grabbing that center point. I want to escape so that I'm not holding the cube. And I want to drag that straight up. You'll notice that it's saying on the blue axis. I hit 2, enter, and I now have a pyramid. This is useful. It's something useful again, which means select it all, G for group, or right-click, make component. I'm calling that pyramid, and then I've got something that I can move around. It won't distort, and the most important thing is if I decide to go and put this over on top of this one, nothing weird is going to happen. I can move it away. If they weren't components, that wouldn't work. So I move it here, move it this way 2 inches. You can play around with moving things around once they're components as well. To create my tent shape, drawing a line, and you'll notice there's all kinds of different options. I can draw a line onto an edge. I can draw a line into a midpoint. I started on a midpoint. You'll notice the line is green. That tells me that I'm drawing on the green axis. I want to move that up on the blue axis. It's 2 inches. As always, all of our measurements are 2 inches. And what I'm doing to finish this off is grabbing the rectangle tool again and filling it in. That makes that tent shape or the roof shape, A-frame, whatever you want to call it, a solid object or a spatially occupied object. So select it, right-click, make component. Let's call it tent to keep it easy. You could call it A-frame, whatever you choose. Now this last one's a little bit funny. This last one will teach us this tool, the tape measure tool. It's one of the most used tools that I use. If I select the edge and I bring it over, you'll notice it's automatically locked onto the midpoint. And I'm basically making guidelines because I actually want to get rid of that square. I want to get rid of the square. I'm looking at making a cylinder. C for circle. There's my center point at that intersection. And a radius of 1 gives us a diameter of 2. I'm just going to hit E, and I'll erase those 2 guidelines. If I want to make this a cylinder, we'll go back to the first one, that cube that we made, use the push-pull tool. And I want to go up 2 inches. Now, one of the neatest things about SketchUp is the way you can inference from one object to another. So I can move my mouse over here, and it lets me bring that up to the midpoint of this line. So you'll notice in the measurement it says 1 inch. I can bring it up to the top. I can come over here, and I know that that's 2 inches because I inferenced it off the cube. Same deal as always. That's useful. Right-click, make component, cylinder. Hopefully I spelt it right. And there we are. Now the next thing to play around with, paint tool. There's a ton of different paints. Some of them are good. Some of them are not so good. Let's throw a blind on the cylinder. It won't look super good because our objects are super small. These are meant for kind of architectural things. You can put glass on it. That'll make it a little bit see-through. There's solid colors, there's fencing, there's bricks, right? We can make the pyramid out of bricks. There's carpets. They're not that interesting, but there you are. So play around with it. There's your first tutorial. 4 shapes. Make sure, absolutely make sure that those are components because that's the best habit to get into. You really, really do want to get into the habit of making sure that anything you make is a component. It will save you so many headaches as you work in SketchUp. So that's the end. Try it out. This next tutorial we'll get into modeling some things that we'll actually build. Okay, thank you.